Welcome to the world of science fiction where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The smuggler's freighter drifted dead in the void, its engines cold. Captain Jace Veldrin cut through the airlock, pulse rifle humming. He expected contraband, weapons, drugs, maybe even a stolen I-core. He didn't expect the cages. 6 Vatheri, tall, silver-skinned, with luminous violet eyes, huddled behind force bars. Their collars pulsed red, suppressing their famed telepathy. The nearest one, a female with scars across her arms, locked eyes with Jace. "You are human," her voice echoed in his skull. Jace recoiled. "How the hell?" "We hear thoughts when the pain lessens," another Vatheri rasped. "The slavers call us echoes." Jace's grip tightened on his rifle. He'd seen slaver pits before, but never aliens this. Aware. "Who's your buyer?" The female bared sharp teeth. "The Crixus Dominion. They break minds for war." A proximity alert blared. The slavers were returning. Jace made a choice. He shot the cage controls. The Crixus warship filled the view screen, its jagged hull bristling with plasma turrets. Jace's fingers danced across the console, diverting power from life support to thrusters. Oxygen levels dropped, but speed was the only god that mattered now. "They're locking on," shouted Kale, the youngest of the Vatheri, his silver skin slick with sweat. Jace didn't answer. He yanked the controls hard to starboard, sending the ship into a spiraling dive. The artificial gravity flickered and Lyra, the scared Vatheri female, slammed into the bulkhead with a hiss. "You're going to kill us before they do," she snarled. "Trust me," Jace growled, though he wasn't sure he trusted himself. The neutron veil loomed ahead, a swirling storm of radiation and debris, the graveyard of 100 ships. No sane pilot would enter it. Jace wasn't sane. The Artemis shuddered as it pierced the veil's outer turbulence. Alarms blared, warning of hull stress, radiation spikes, and the fact that their shields were at 12% and dropping. Behind them, the Crixus ship slowed, its commander hesitating at the edge of the storm. "They're not following," Kel breathed. "Not yet," Jace muttered. Then the comms crackled to life. A deep, guttural voice spoke in broken universal standard. "Human, you cannot hide forever. Surrender the Vathari, and we will grant you a quick death." Jace flicked the channel closed. "Yeah, hard pass." Lyra's fingers dug into his shoulder. "They're lying. They'll torture you first. The Crixus love breaking humans." Jace's jaw tightened. Not today. He pushed the engines harder. The ship groaned in protest, but it held. They had minutes, maybe less, before the Crixus decided the veil was worth the risk. Jace needed a plan. "Lyra, you said you can hear thoughts. Can you sense where they are?" Her violet eyes flickered. "Not clearly. The collars still suppress us. But fragments. Images. Better than nothing. Tell me the second you pick up anything." Kale suddenly stiffened. "Wait. They're moving. 2 smaller ships, flanking us." Jace cursed. "Gunships. Faster, deadlier." The first shot grazed their aft section, sending sparks raining from the ceiling. The Artemis lurched, and Jace fought to stabilize it. "Lyra, now would be a great time for some psychic help." She clenched her fists, her brow furrowing in pain. "Left. Now." Jace obeyed. A split second later, a plasma burst tore through the space where they'd just been. "How the hell?" "I saw it," she gasped. "Their pilot's thoughts, just for a second." Jace grinned. "Then let's use that." He banked sharply, feinting toward a dense cluster of debris. The gunships followed, their pilots confident. Too confident. At the last possible second, Jace cut thrusters and spun the ship into a dead stop. The lead gunship overshot, straight into the path of a drifting asteroid. The explosion lit up the veil in a brilliant blue fireball. "One down," Jace muttered. The second gunship adjusted, more cautious now. It hung back, peppering them with suppressing fire. "They're calling for reinforcements," Lyra whispered. "The mothership is coming." Jace exhaled. Time for Plan B. He turned to the Vathari. "You ever flown a ship before?" They stared at him. "Great. Kale, take the controls." "What?" "I don't." "You don't have to fly well. Just fly straight for 10 seconds. Jace didn't wait for an answer. He sprinted to the rear compartment, where the ship's emergency payload was stored, a single EMP charge meant for disabling hostile drones. Lyra followed. "What are you doing?" "Buying us time." He armed the charge. "When I give the signal, Kel cuts engines. You tell me the second that gunship gets close." She understood immediately. "You're going to blind them." And then we run like hell. The Artemis shook as another volley rocked the hull. Warning lights flashed. Oxygen reserves critical, engine stability failing. "Now, Lyra. They're coming. Hard and fast." Jace hurled the EMP charge out the airlock. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a pulse of white light. The gunship's systems shorted out, sending it spiraling helplessly into the void. "Kale, go." The Artemis roared back to life, streaking deeper into the veil. Behind them, the Crixus mothership hesitated, its sensors scrambled. They weren't safe. Not yet. But they'd bought time. Silence settled over the ship, broken only by the rasp of strained breathing. Kale slumped in the pilot's seat, his hands shaking. That was insane. Jace wiped blood from a cut above his eye. "Worked, didn't it?" Lyra studied him. "You risked your life for us." "Why?" Jace met her gaze. "Because slavers are the same everywhere. Human, Crixus, doesn't matter. And I've got a rule about letting scum win." She tilted her head. "You're not what we expected from your species." He smirked. "Yeah, well, humans are full of surprises." The ship shuddered again, this time from internal damage. "We can't stay in the veil much longer," Kale said. "Radiation's eating through the hull." Jace nodded. "Then we find a way out." "And after that?" He looked at Lyra. "We hit them back." Her eyes gleamed. "You'll need our help for that." "Damn right I will." The Artemis shot forward, leaving the storm behind and heading straight into the fire. The escape from the neutron veil had cost them. The Artemis limped through the void, its hull scorched, its engines sputtering. Jace sat in the pilot's seat, fingers drumming against the armrest, his mind racing. They needed repairs. They needed supplies. And most of all, they needed to disappear before the Crixus caught their trail again. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes scanning the star charts. "There's an outpost near the Talus Rift. Neutral territory. No Crixus presence." Jace grunted. "Neutral usually means full of people who'd sell us out for a credit." She turned to him, unblinking. "Do you have a better option?" He didn't. The outpost was a ramshackle cluster of docking rings and modular habitats, clinging to the edge of a dead mining asteroid. It stank of engine grease and recycled air. As the Artemis settled into an empty berth, Jace kept one hand near his sidearm. Kale, still shaky from their escape, hesitated at the ramp. "What if they recognize us?" Jace smirked. "Then we shoot our way out." Again. Lyra shot him a look. "Or we could try subtlety." "Never been my strong suit." The outpost's market was a mess of species, traders, mercenaries, drifters with no allegiance. Jace kept his hood up, the Vathari close behind him, their collars hidden beneath scavenged cloaks. They'd moved quickly, gathering what they could: medical supplies, ration packs, a few spare parts that might keep the Artemis flying a little longer. Then, halfway through the bazaar, Lyra froze. Jace felt it too, a prickle at the back of his neck. Someone was watching. He turned casually, scanning the crowd. A collision broker stood at a stall, his 4 eyes flicking toward them before darting away. Too fast, too deliberate. "Kale," Jace murmured. Take the supplies back to the ship. Now. The young Vatheri didn't argue. Lyra's voice was low. He knows. Yeah. Jace exhaled. Time to go. They didn't make it far. 3 figures stepped from the shadows. Hulking Draxar enforcers, their scaled skin glinting under the flickering lights. The lead one grinned, needle-like teeth on full display. Captain Jace Velderan, he rumbled. You're worth a lot of credits alive. Jace didn't waste time talking. He shot the first Draxar in the throat. Chaos erupted. Market-goers screamed, scrambling for cover as pulse fire lit up the narrow alley. Jace grabbed Lyra's arm, dragging her behind an overturned cargo crate. We can't fight them all, she hissed. Not planning to. He ejected the spent cartridge from his pistol, reloading with his last energy cell. Got a better idea. Lyra's eyes darkened. Yes, but you won't like it. Before he could ask, she reached for her collar. A sharp crack echoed as the suppressor shattered under her fingers. Jace's vision swam. Suddenly, he wasn't in the alley anymore. He was standing on a battlefield, smoke choking the air, the screams of dying Vatheri ringing in his ears. Then a cold lab, straps biting into his wrists, a Crixus scientist leaning over him with a scalpel. Then Lyra's voice, cutting through the haze. Run. He blinked. Reality snapped back. The Draxar were on their knees, clutching their heads, blood trickling from their nostrils. Lyra stood over them, her entire body trembling, violet light bleeding from her eyes like liquid fire. Jace didn't hesitate. He grabbed her and ran. By the time they reached the Artemis, Lyra was barely conscious, her breathing ragged. Kale helped drag her aboard, his face pale. What happened? Jace sealed the hatch behind them. She did something. Something big. Lyra coughed, her voice a broken whisper. I showed them their worst fears. It's what we do. Jace stared at her. You can do that to anyone. She met his gaze. Yes. But every time we use our gifts, it takes something from us. That's why the Crixus collar us. To keep us from burning out too fast. Kale looked sick. You could have died. Lyra closed her eyes. Still might. Jace started the engines. Not if I can help it. The Artemis lifted off, leaving the outpost and the bounty hunters behind. But as the stars blurred into hyperspace, Jace couldn't shake the images Lyra had shown him. The battlefield. The lab. The pain. He glanced at her, slumped against the co-pilot's seat. The Crixus hadn't just enslaved the Vatheri. They'd weaponized them. And now, so would he. The Artemis shuddered out of hyperspace at the edge of the Gorath system, its engines groaning from the strain. Jace checked the scanners. No Crixus signatures, no bounty hunter tails, just dead space and the faint hum of a distant pulsar. Lyra sat slumped in the co-pilot's chair, her breathing steadier now but her silver skin dull, as if the light inside her had dimmed. Kale hovered nearby, handing her a water pouch with shaking hands. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered. She took the pouch, her fingers trembling. We'd be dead if I hadn't. Jace kept his voice low. How long until you can do it again? Lyra's violet eyes flicked to him. Days. Maybe weeks. If I push too soon, it'll kill me. He exhaled through his nose. That complicated things. Kel's voice cracked. We can't fight them like this. We should run. Find somewhere deep in the fringe and hide. Jace turned the idea over in his head. It was the smart play. The safe one. Then he thought about the visions Lyra had forced into his skull. The labs, the experiments, the way the Crixus broke the Vatheri like tools. He slammed his fist on the console. No. We hit them first. Lyra's brow furrowed. With what army? Jace grinned. It wasn't a pleasant expression. With theirs. The Crixus slave hub on Gorath 3 wasn't a fortress. It didn't need to be. No one was stupid enough to attack a Dominion outpost head-on, which was exactly why Jace was going to do it. He laid out the schematics on the Artemis battered table, stolen data from a smuggler's cache 2 systems back. The hub was a sprawling complex, half buried in the planet's toxic deserts. One main gate, a handful of guard towers, and deep beneath it, the prize. A vault holding dozens of freshly captured victories, all collared and ready for shipment to the front lines. Kale swallowed hard. You want to break into that? Not just break in. Jace tapped the screen. We're gonna burn it down. Lyra studied the schematics. Even if we free the others, they'll be too weak to fight. The collars are controlled from the central hub. Jace pointed to a blinking node on the map. Shut that down, and every suppressor in the complex fails at once. A silence settled over the cabin. Kale looked like he might vomit. Lyra's fingers traced the scars on her arms, old wounds from before the collar. Finally, she spoke. If we do this, the Dominion will hunt us to the ends of the galaxy. Jace leaned back, crossing his arms. Let him try. Gorath 3's atmosphere was a choking mix of sulfur and dust. The Artemis touched down in a canyon 5 clicks from the hub, its landing struts sinking slightly into the ashy soil. Jace checked his gear one last time. Pulse pistol, plasma knife, a handful of EMP grenades scavenged from the outpost. Lyra and Kale stood ready, their cloaks hiding their telltale silver skin. No heroics, Jace said. We get in, free the prisoners, blow the hub, and leave. Anything goes wrong, you run. Understood. Kale nodded shakily. Lyra just stared at him, her gaze unreadable. The approach was a slog. The desert winds howled, flinging grit into their eyes. Twice, patrol drones buzzed overhead, their spotlights sweeping the dunes. Each time, they flattened themselves into the ash until the machines passed. Then the hub's outer wall loomed ahead, a jagged slab of black alloy, lined with razor wire. Jace pulled out a small device, a frequency scrambler lifted from a dead bounty hunter. This'll blind their sensors for 60 seconds. After that, we're on the clock. He activated it. The wall's security lights flickered and died. Go. They scaled the wall fast, Jace boosting Kale up first before hauling himself and Lyra over. The inner compound was eerily quiet, just a few bored-looking Crixus guards milling near a storage shed. Lyra's hand clamped onto Jace's wrist. Wait. Her voice was a whisper in his mind. He froze. A second later, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A cloaked assassin, blade drawn, creeping toward the oblivious guards. Jace's blood ran cold. Victory, but not like Lyra. This one moved like a predator, its collar modified, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow instead of violet. Lyra's mental voice was strained. They turned some of us into hunters, to track escapees. The assassin struck. 2 guards died before they could scream, their throats slit with surgical precision. The third managed a choked gasp before the blade found his spine. The assassin paused, sniffing the air, then turned straight toward their hiding spot. Jace didn't think. He shot it in the face. The creature crumpled, its cloak fluttering to the ground. Kale gagged. What was that? Lyra's voice was hollow. What the Crixus want us all to become. Jace ejected the spent cartridge. Then let's make sure they never get the chance. The central hub was a squat, windowless building at the heart of the compound. Jace picked the lock on a service hatch, and they slipped inside, descending into the bowels of the facility. The air grew colder the deeper they went. The walls were lined with stasis pods, each holding a Vathari prisoner frozen in silent agony. Kale made a wounded noise in his throat. Lyra's fists clenched. They're draining them, using their pain to power the collars. Jace's stomach turned. Can they be woken up? She pressed a hand to the nearest pod. If we disable the control hub, yes, but they'll be weak. Then let's move. The control room was just ahead, a sealed door with a retinal scanner. Jace cursed. No way we're hacking that. Lyra stepped forward. We don't need to. She closed her eyes. A tremor ran through her, and for a second, Jace thought she might collapse. Then, the door's locks clicked open. Inside, a single Crixus technician looked up in shock. Jace put a bullet between his eyes before he could reach the alarm. Kale rushed to the console. "I can shut down the collars, but—" A klaxon blared. Red lights flashed. They'd been made. Lyra swayed, blood trickling from her nose. "Hurry." Cal's fingers flew over the controls. Almost. Got it. A pulse of energy rippled through the facility. Every stasis pod hissed open at once. The freed victories staggered from their pods, disoriented, their collars dark and dead. Then the first one screamed. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a weapon. The walls trembled. The Crixus guards rushing into the room clutched their heads, their eyes bursting like overripe fruit. Jace fell to his knees, his vision swimming, his skull on fire. Lyra grabbed him, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Focus on me." Her presence in his mind was an anchor, holding him together as the Vaetheri's psychic fury tore through the hub. When it ended, the room was silent. The Crixus were dead. The Vaetheri stood victorious. And Jace realized, with dawning horror, that he'd just unleashed something far worse than slavers. Something even the Dominion feared. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes glowing like dying stars. "Now you see," she whispered. "This is why they cage us." Jace had no answer. The Artemis wouldn't hold them all. But as the fires of the burning hub lit the desert sky, one thing was clear. The hunt was far from over. The Artemis was never meant to hold 27 Vaetheri. Jace stood in the cargo bay, watching as the newly freed prisoners huddled together, their silver skin dulled by years of captivity. Some were whispering in their own tongue, others staring blankly at the walls as if they'd forgotten what freedom looked like. Lyra moved among them, her hands brushing against shoulders, her voice low and steady. Even drained from overusing her abilities, she was still their anchor. Kale approached Jace, his violet eyes wide with disbelief. "We actually did it." Jace grunted. "We're not clear yet." The ship's proximity alarm blared. 4 Crixus destroyers had just dropped out of warp. Jace sprinted to the cockpit, his boots pounding against the metal grating. The scanners showed the destroyers fanning out, their weapons charging. No demands, no hails, just the cold, methodical positioning of hunters who knew their prey was cornered. Lyra slid into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers gripping the armrests. "They'll destroy the ship rather than let us escape again." Jace's jaw tightened. "Then we don't let them." He punched the engines to full burn, sending the Artemis streaking toward the nearest destroyer. Cal's voice crackled over the comm. "What are you doing?" Jace didn't answer. He waited until the last possible second, until the destroyer's turrets locked on, then cut thrusters and rolled the ship sideways, skimming beneath its belly. The Crixus fired anyway, their plasma volleys slamming into their own vessel's shields. The destroyer reeled, its systems flickering. Lyra's eyes locked onto the chaos. "They're confused, angry." She hesitated, afraid. Jace smirked. "Good." But the other 3 destroyers were adjusting, their commanders smarter than the first. They spread into a kill formation, blocking every escape vector. Jace's fingers flew over the nav console. "We need a miracle." Then, a new signal flashed on the scanner. Unidentified ships. Dozens of them. The newcomers streaked into the battle like knives, jagged, fast, their hulls painted in the colors of a dozen different mercenary bands and rebel factions. Jace's breath caught. The Talus Rift pirates. Lyra frowned. "Why would they help us?" A gruff voice crackled over the comm. "That you, Veldren. Heard you pissed off the Dominion. Figured we'd watch the show." Jace recognized the voice. Raka, a smuggler he'd crossed paths with years ago. A bastard, but not a Crixus sympathizer. He opened the channel. "You here to fight or just spectate?" Raka's laughter was a static-filled bark. "Oh, we're fighting. Ain't every day you get to stick it to those scale-faced tyrants." The pirate ships opened fire. The Crixus destroyers, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Jace didn't wait. He slammed the Artemis into a spiraling dive, weaving through the sudden chaos. Lyra gripped her seat. "Where are we going?" Jace's voice was steel. "To finish this." The Dominion command ship hung at the edge of the battle, its obsidian hull bristling with weapons. Jace knew what it was, a psychic dampener designed to neutralize Vatheri abilities on a planetary scale. If it activated, every freed prisoner aboard the Artemis would be helpless. Lyra sensed his plan before he spoke it. "You can't. That ship is too heavily armored." Jace ejected the Artemis escape pod, a one-man cockpit with no weapons, no shields, just thrusters. "Good thing I'm not aiming for the armor." He transferred control to the pod. Lyra's hand caught his wrist. "You'll die." Jace met her gaze. "Yeah, but you won't." He didn't give her time to argue. The pod shot away, streaking toward the command ship's ventilation array, the one weak point in its design. The Crixus didn't see it coming. The impact was silent in the vacuum of space, but the explosion wasn't. The command ship's core ruptured, its dampener overloading in a cascade of blue fire. A psychic shockwave ripped through the battlefield. Every Vatheri aboard the Artemis screamed as their full power returned in a flood. And then, silence. Jace woke to the sound of alarms. The pod's emergency systems had ejected him at the last second, hurling him into the wreckage of a dead frigate. His suit was breached. Oxygen was low. He was going to suffocate before anyone found him. Then, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Lyra's face filled his vision, her violet eyes blazing. "You," she growled, "are infuriating." Behind her, the Artemis hovered, its cargo bay open. Kale and the others stood at the ramp, their collars gone, their eyes alight with something Jace had never seen before. Hope. Raka's voice crackled over the comm one last time. "Damn, human. You've got stones. Don't die. I owe you a drink." Then the pirates vanished into warp, leaving the battlefield littered with the corpses of Crixus ships. Lyra hauled Jace into the Artemis, her grip bruising. "Never do that again." He coughed, his vision swimming. No promises. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, the last thing Jace saw was the freed Vatheri gathering around him, not as prisoners, not as weapons, as a people. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Word spread fast. A human had broken the Dominion's hold over the Vatheri. A human had won. On fringe worlds, in rebel camps, in the darkest corners of the galaxy, whispers grew into something louder. A name. Veldran. And with it, a doctrine. The Crixus fear us. Let's give them a reason. Jace never asked for a revolution, but he'd damn well finish one.